Hello, and a very warm welcome to this Asian Development Bank Virtual Business Opportunities Seminar, delivered to you in partnership with the Department for International Trade and British Expertise International. The aim of today is to understand upcoming pipeline projects from the ADB officers themselves and know how to qualify for ADB finance contracts. We will start with an introduction of the business opportunities goals, followed by brief presentations on education, health, and specific on doing business with the Asian Development Bank. We are delighted that Sam Myers, the Deputy Trade Commissioner for Southeast Asia at the Department for International Trade, has joined us to deliver opening remarks. I'm Veronica Lake from the UK-ASEAN Business Council and have a couple of notes to highlight before we begin. Firstly, we would love to hear from you, so please use the question box at the bottom of your screen. I will always pass them over to the right speaker. Please note that all slides and the recording of this presentation will be shared with you after the webinar. And last, if you are on social media, do tag us. And now, to deliver her opening remarks and today's chair of the seminar, I would like to hand over to Alexandra Barnes, Director Strategic Initiatives at the British Expertise International. Alexandra, over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Veronica, and it's great to be with everybody here this morning. My name is Alexandra Barnes. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives, as Veronica mentioned, but also I lead the education sector for British Expertise globally. So today, British Expertise International, in partnership with the Department for International Trade and the UK-ASEAN Business Council, are delighted to welcome everybody to the first session in this year's annual Business Opportunities Forum with the Asian Development Bank. And as Veronica mentioned, we will be joined by a panel of ADB experts who will share with us an overview of doing business with the ADB and actually navigating the procurement process. And we will drill down into challenges and opportunities in the key sectors of healthcare and education. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Sam Myers, Deputy Trade Commissioner for Southeast Asia at the Department for International Trade, for some opening words. Sam is based out in Singapore and leads a team of around 90 staff across the ASEAN region, and they're based in British embassies and in diplomatic missions. Before joining DIT, Sam was on secondment to the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, where he was head of UK Science Policy and Relations. With that, Deputy Trade Commissioner, over to you for your opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Alexandra, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today, depending on what part of the world you're based in. So I'd like to start by thanking ADB for co-organising today's Virtual Business Opportunities Seminar, along with my team at the Department for International Trade, and also to our event partners, the UK-ASEAN Business Council and British Expertise International. Collectively, it's been a lot of effort to bring this together, but we hope it's a really useful session that gives some practical ideas and suggestions for how to benefit from the opportunities coming from the ADB. So specifically, Rustam and procurement team at ADB, thank you. Ian, Veronica, and the team at UKABC, and Alexandra and your team at British Expertise International, thank you very much. So the ADB is really an important and valuable partner for the UK in Asia and the Pacific. Governments in the region have been supported to finance projects and help them progress across the Sustainable Development Goals, thanks to ADB, who have likewise recently assumed a really critical role in shaping and supporting the region's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, working with governments and ensuring that the recovery that comes from the crisis will be green, inclusive, and resilient. UK. And that was set out in writing in a document called the Integrated Review, which highlights the UK's Indo-Pacific tilt and deeper engagement with the region. And it's also been exemplified by the UK's campaign to secure dialogue partner status with the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, with our progress towards accession of the mega trade deal CPTPP, as well as our ongoing deep collaboration and partnership with this part of the world. And as part of that, the UK is really committed to finding ways to work even more closely with ADB to ensure the region's recovery. Facilitating and building partnerships with UK expertise will be key to that endeavour. The UK and ADB have a long and prosperous relationship, and the UK has been proud and delighted to serve as one of ADB's founding members. On the board of directors today, we have a secondee from the UK government, from the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, Phil, who many of you will know very well, Phil Rose, and he's really supportive of engagement with the ADB and ensuring that the partnership can continue to grow and flourish. In my space on trade and investment, the ADB provides a unique and strategically important set of exporting opportunities for British companies looking to enter or expand into the region. And that's why I hope many of you are here joining us today. All companies working on ADB funded contracts are guaranteed payment, assured of transparency, and protected by ADB's robust procurement framework. And so by working with ADB, companies have the chance to expand market reach, grow networks, and establish credentials in the Asia Pacific. The annual Virtual Business Opportunities Seminar is one of the ADB's initiatives to reach out to new exporters and experts, and thus new companies for partnerships and collaboration. And this year's series will be conducted in 2 sessions, with today's seminar focusing on the ADB's education and health programmes. Now, many of you will know that education and health are among the cornerstones of ADB's COVID-19 response. And in the post-pandemic recovery, developing regions in Asia are working really closely with the ADB to ensure that robust social infrastructures are in place, protecting some of the most vulnerable communities. More investments will be made to enhance social sectors and prevent further setbacks against the region's SDG targets, of which we'll be hearing more about today. And I'm confident and convinced that this will open the door for more UK companies, many of you who I hope are on the line or watching this video, to participate in ADB funded projects. And through today's session, we're going to be discovering new opportunities to do so, as well as provide you the connections to follow up and make the sort of follow-up steps needed to secure those partnerships. Now, the UK offers in education and health are really exciting and innovative. So we've deliberately chosen this sector as a really important one where we know that there's a mutual benefit and partnership that can come. And the UK's expertise has been recently exemplified through EdTech and digital health solutions as we've gone through the pandemic, and the tech and digital space has become even more important. Historically, the UK does well in ADB's commercial procurement. We've secured over 8,000 contracts since the bank's founding, and these are cumulatively worth almost $3.5 billion US. The UK does particularly well in ADB consultancy and is rated highly by the ADB due to the quality service delivery that's provided by our companies. While UK performance is top ranked, the ADB is still keen to reach out to include more of you, innovative and expert UK companies, in their network. And so, as well as today's seminar, you've got ongoing support provided by myself and the team at the Department for International Trade. We're joined on the line by Karen, Chiki and Richard, who are based in the British Embassy in Manila, and they're on standby to help you follow up the conversations and ideas that I hope are triggered by today's event. You're also joined on this call by a whole range of experts, many of whom will be introducing themselves from British Expertise International, ADB themselves and beyond. And so I really encourage you to make full use of the contacts, names and ideas that are to follow. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the rest of the session today and really look forward to hearing from you and helping you with follow-up with the ideas. Thank you very much for inviting me to share these thoughts and remarks, and back to you, Alexandra.
Thank you so much for that, Deputy Trade Commissioner, and I couldn't have said it better myself. The UK offering in these sectors is just very exciting and innovative, and I know as British Expertise International, we're very much trying to help platform some of that expertise more widely, as we have been doing recently actually with our education working group, which I have the pleasure of leading on behalf of British Expertise International, and our recent report on the lost learning crisis. And of course, COVID-19 has only worsened some of the inequalities that we have seen already in the healthcare and education systems globally. But also on the flip side, this does produce some opportunities, with some governments and multilateral partners quite rightly taking advantage of some of the progress that's been made in areas such as access and some of the remote solutions that have been developed over the past couple of years. And of course, as we know, the ADB puts great importance on supporting both of these essential sectors, healthcare and education. And as a very important multilateral partner to the UK, it does work towards the same objectives as the UK and values across the Asia-Pacific region. So before I hand over to Rustam Abdulkayumov for his introductory remarks, just a very quick reminder to everybody, please do put your questions into the Q&A box throughout the event as they come to mind, and we will try and get to as many of them as possible during the Q&A. And if we can't get to them, we will aim to answer them afterwards. So just as Sam mentioned there, do please make use of all of the contacts that you see on the event. And this recording will be shared as well as the slides after the event, so you will get all the information. So with that, I'm delighted now to hand over to Rustam Abdulkayumov, and he's the Director of Procurement at ADB. Rustam has been with ADB for the last 19 years, joining in 2001 as a portfolio management officer in ADB's Uzbekistan resident mission, and later becoming procurement specialist. Rustam, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, and good morning to our colleagues in the UK, and good day to our colleagues in Manila and elsewhere. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual business opportunities seminar, and I would like to extend our thanks to host organizations, UK Department for International Trade, UK-ASEAN Business Council, and British Expertise International for helping us in organizing this event. As you know, ADB is a multilateral development bank whose aim is to improve the living standards in its developing member countries in Asia and the Pacific. And our portfolio is continuously growing, and new types of projects are being prepared. To give you some idea, ADB's current sovereign operations portfolio is about $100 billion US. It means the value of all ongoing projects financed by ADB under government guarantees. And in addition to that, we have about 14 billion of non-sovereign portfolio operations, which are not guaranteed by the government. And these are managed by ADB's private sector operations department. Many of you perhaps are aware that last year, ADB has announced a new package of $20 billion US, which is available to our developing member countries to support their efforts in fighting the pandemic and strengthening their health care systems. About 18 billion, not 18, maybe about 15 billion out of that amount has been already committed. And a large part of that is used for financing procurement and administration of COVID-19 vaccines in many different countries. We see quite a big improvement in this area because we all know that initially it was difficult to access vaccines. But now many countries have already signed contracts and vaccines are being delivered and vaccination programs are being implemented. Coming to consulting services, just to give an idea, in 2020, ADB provided about 200 million plus for consulting services that ADB administers by itself. This means that ADB does recruitment of consultants and manages those contracts. On average, we finance about 4,000 contracts with individual consultants and 200 plus contracts with firms in any given year. But in addition to that, there are also many consulting opportunities under loans and grants, which are managed by the borrowers, where ADB only does the oversight, but ADB does not directly engage in administering those contracts. Many of you who had prior experience working with ADB, perhaps you remember that until 2019, ADB used to have so-called business opportunities fairs in Manila. So this was quite a big event, was a good opportunity for all those who come to Manila to network with ADB staff and learn about business opportunities with ADB. So the last business opportunities fair was attended by more than 1,000 participants. But unfortunately, starting from 2020, when the COVID basically kicked in and there were travel restrictions, we could not hold such events in Manila. And we basically moved to a virtual format. Situation this year is also not very clear in terms of when everything will come back to normal, and we will be continuing conducting these business opportunities seminars in a virtual format as we have today, but we also see quite increased interest from the business community. Last year, we have conducted 34 business opportunity seminars in different countries, and I think this year we will even increase this target. No, it's not a target, but I think the number will be much greater. At today's event, at your request, we will focus on ADB's operations covering education and health sectors, which are not the largest in ADB portfolio in terms of value, but nevertheless, these are becoming more and more important, taking into account the pandemic. And actually, ADB's main response to the pandemic challenges comes from projects which are being prepared in these two sectors, because we know health sector needs a lot of support for implementation of vaccination program, but education sector is also heavily affected by the pandemic, and the new kind of approaches are being considered in education to make sure that the students receive knowledge and basically continue with the education so that there is no big gap. And today, let me maybe introduce our speakers very briefly. We will have Shanti Jagannathan, our principal education specialist, who will talk about the education sector priorities. Then we will have Arvind Dutta, our senior health specialist, who will talk about health sector initiatives. And then we will have Julian Dotzi, who is a procurement specialist, and he will talk about ADB's procurement framework, the system, processes, opportunities in different sectors, but also focusing on opportunities created under our COVID-related projects. So life goes on, and we are trying to continue our collaboration with the business communities in the world, despite of the challenges caused by the pandemic. And we really value cooperation with our business partners, because it's very important to have your inputs in preparation and implementation of ADB finance projects. So I hope that you will find today's seminar useful. I hope we'll be able to provide answers to your questions, and that would lead to better understanding on how ADB operates. And finally, and maybe quite importantly, we hope that as a result, you will be able to win contracts under ADB finance projects. So I'll stop here and hand over to Alexandra. Thank you very much.
Rustam, thank you so much for that introduction, and very much looking forward to all of the presentations today. And as you've just mentioned, our first presentation is on the education sector, and that's going to be with Shanti Jagannathan, who is a Principal Education Specialist, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the ADB. Shanti, with that, over to you. And I've had a sneak peek at the presentation and it looks fantastic, so can't wait. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the session today. I'm representing ADB's Education Sector Group. I'm pleased to make this presentation on business opportunities for consultancies in the education sector. Let me start with the context in which ADB's investments in human capital development are programmed. As it's well known, Asian economies have enjoyed high growth rates globally, And in fact, this trend is expected to continue even past COVID-19. While obviously some level down is expected in growth rates, it's projected that the Asian region will grow at a faster rate compared to the global average. So it's clear that in order to sustain high growth rates, Asian economies have to focus even more strongly on knowledge-based growth that requires higher order education, skills, and talent development. In a post-COVID scenario where economies are struggling to revive industries and jobs, reports indicate that reskilling and investment in digital talent will be 2 of the 5 key levers for speedy post-COVID recovery. The region has to contend with some well-known problems that have persisted even before COVID. And these include inequalities, continuing inequalities, disparities, and lack of higher order skills, and less than uniform digitalization. Next slide. Let me go into some of the challenges then. I know what are these challenges that our developing member countries face. Top of mind for everyone is what is now being widely called the learning crisis, or a situation where students, although enrolled, are not reaching desired levels of learning or competencies. Contributing to this and compounding the problem of lack of learning are ineffective teacher practices, lack of professional capacities, slow pace of new curriculum development that incorporates creativity and learning to learn principles, inadequate attention to soft skills and digital skills, and the gap between what education institutions believe is needed in the market and what employers are actually looking for when hiring talent. An aspect that is increasingly come into spotlight during COVID is the lack of preparedness, particularly in public education systems, in using digital technologies for teaching and learning, and using such technologies for improving employment prospects. But the good news is that governments are increasingly turning their attention to improving learning with attention to equity. And COVID-19 has been a very loud wake-up call to address digitalization in a fair and equitable way, and in a way that serves the interests of learners. Next slide. This slide shows trends in ADB's education sector lending. As you can see, South Asia by far holds the largest portfolio of education programs with a nearly 50% share, which is reflective of the large countries in the region. The other big region is Southeast Asia, which is over a third of the total portfolio. The projected pipeline between 21 and 23 is over 5 billion. In terms of subsectors, TVET or skills development occupies the bulk of the portfolio, and it constitutes over 40% of programs in the pipeline between 21 and 23. Tertiary education, which was a small component during the 2015 to 17 period, has now grown significantly and occupies 26% of the total portfolio, reflecting what I said earlier about the importance that countries are attaching to building higher order talent and higher skills. Next slide. If I can now move to talk about typical consulting opportunities that ADB puts out. Typically, we can group them into 3 categories. The first being the design phase or project preparatory phase, during which we typically use what we call transaction technical assistance or knowledge and support technical assistance. For implementation, we would typically have a TA that is piggybacked to our loan project or program for project management and implementation support. And then comes monitoring and evaluation, where a range of services may be sought, which could be in the nature of routine M&E for conducting baseline, midterm, and inline evaluations, conducting TRISA studies of graduates to assess impact on employment, and similar activities. In the case where ADB uses results-based lending modality, this requires an annual verification of achievement of targets and milestones, and these are usually contracted to a third-party verification agency at the country level who may have tie-ups with international partners. So for these activities, ADB recruits consultants both individually as well as through firms. Next slide. Let me talk now briefly about expectations and requests that come from our partner countries as we design and implement our programs. Increasingly, our partners are seeking more than just development finance. And this actually sits well with ADB's own approach of finance plus plus partnerships, where the first plus is around additional financing leverage, and the second plus being implementing knowledge solutions to difficult development challenges and knowledge partnerships. Developing countries routinely ask us to share with them what we consider to be global best practice or information and insights on how advanced countries have gone about addressing certain challenges and issues and how they've overcome them. Whether it's skills development or university education, our partners in developing countries are increasingly looking to benchmark themselves globally and therefore seek information and knowledge sharing, which we try to embed in our TA programs. ADB seeks to thus build a strong value addition to governments by bringing high quality diagnostic analysis and evidence-based policy, with which we hope to provide as inputs to the design of our programs in partnership with consultants and technical collaboration. Next slide. In this slide, I'd like to just go over briefly in as examples some of the key areas that continue to grow in importance as themes, as well as some emerging areas that call for new technical and consulting partnerships. In school education, where while ADB does have some interventions in early childhood education and primary education, much of our focus is on secondary education. Hence, the priorities we seek to implement are to do with improving quality of science education or STEM disciplines in a way that's equitable and also serves girls. Given that globally many studies are pointing to lack of soft skills, we look to prepare curriculum based on these, and it's also preoccupying us in terms of how we can measure, monitor, and report on the competencies achieved by students. In academic curriculum, the development of capacities for student learning assessment at the country level and building capacities for doing this is a critical of dealing with the learning crisis. This also relates to how new technologies that are now available can make this more real time and can be more strongly leveraged by educators to change classroom practice. With rise of digitalization, there is growing interest on how to incorporate coding and learning of digital skills, as well as how more and more online and blended learning approaches can be adopted. These call for changes to instructional design, teacher training, as well as new learning management systems that are more suited to these new methods. And we are looking for continued technical support in these areas. In TVET, which is the largest segment in ADB's education portfolio, skills for jobs have always been a central objective. With the trend of the times, ADB and our partner countries are looking for skills that can be applied to climate resilient and green occupations, to the needs of health workforce, as well as the broader care economy, including elderly care, high-tech agriculture, all of which can contribute to increasing access to quality jobs. In all this, it's increasingly becoming clear that higher order skills are crucial to succeed in the labor markets of tomorrow and to increase productivity of industries. Hence, we have in our portfolio investments in institutions of higher order learning like polytechnics and skills university, which seek to build advanced skills. Our current preoccupations also include how we can pivot traditional practices such as labor market information systems, which have tended to be expensive and time-consuming, to more agile and real-time tools that use current technologies, but which can also adapt and be affordable, that can be adapted and can be affordable at the country level. Artificial intelligence-based job matching platforms are gathering pace, and we would like to explore how to bring such frontier technologies to bear on public education and training systems. In higher education, focus areas revolve around research, innovation, and efforts to strengthen startup ecosystems for advanced skills in the digital domain and new technologies, and how we can leverage digital credentials and blockchain for qualifications going forward. Next slide. I'd like to now share thoughts on possible new modalities that we would like to explore in the way we function in providing technical and professional support to our countries, partner countries. In response to the needs and aspirations, we'd like to look at avenues that go beyond just short-term consulting into longer-term institutional partnerships and twinning, which are based on peer-to-peer knowledge transfer, collaborations in research, and exchange programs for faculty and students. And also, how can we encourage institutions in developing countries to become centers of excellence that serve as lighthouse institutions. And all these call for more creative approaches, how we can deliver technical assistance, and we constantly look for ideas, new ideas that are embedded in our consultancy programs. Next up, next slide. I would like to flag ADB Strategy 2030 and Operational Priority 1, where education is located. So Strategy 2030 has signaled an important departure from sector silos to intersectoral work, and to that end, we seek to promote knowledge work in areas such as skills for infrastructure, climate resilient occupations, smart cities, and high-tech agriculture. Under OP1, Operational Priority 1, education is bundled with health and social protection with a view to amplify the development impact of the social sector, particularly in giving rise to quality jobs. Finally, we believe that the aftermath of COVID-19 may give us the means to reimagine and rejuvenate education delivery in ways that may not have been considered so easy earlier on. An obvious area is, of course, digitalization, but ADB has prepared a guidance note on how we can really reimagine education training to embrace new and transformational approaches. Next slide. In this final slide, I'd like to go back to some of the topics in which UK expertise and collaboration will be fruitful. We look for UK expertise that's relevant in a global context and located in a global scenario in which critical areas of quality around school leadership, reforms in examinations and assessment processes, how we can deploy affordable technology to strengthen quality of education and learning, improving learning levels. How can we strengthen the role of the private sectors to scale up quality education? How can we open up new pathways for equity in the context of girls? I mean, all the earlier work has been around expanding access to girls. Now we need to go beyond access into learning, into quality of learning, into making sure that girls and women have access to non-traditional sector employment and STEM disciplines and jobs in new economy occupations. How disadvantaged youth can be roped in, as youth unemployment tends to be much higher, and how can we address students with disability? We'd like to explore all these through various partnership modalities. We'd also like to explore possible university networks that can help increase the quality of tertiary education in our partner countries. So in short, we're looking for a lot more knowledge bundled with operations on the ground. We're looking to blend experiences of the developed world with the developing world, and how we can strengthen more peer partnerships. I'll stop there in the appendices to this next slide. I think beyond this, there are a number of slides I put together which have list of ADB projects which you can look through based on your interest. Thank you very much.
Shanti, fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. And as I've mentioned, we will be sharing all the slides so you can take a detailed look at these pipeline projects. You don't need to screenshot away right now, but thank you for that. What really stood out for me, I think, is the need, and I think this is a global need, and it's absolutely the same in the UK as well. Complex skills is really what we need in the future. So things like metacognition, things like communication, collaboration, and of course, it's quite difficult to embed that in a curriculum, and even more difficult to then assess it, as you said. However, I know that many British companies have fantastic ideas and research in this space. So we look forward to connecting some of today's attendees with you, hopefully, for some of those opportunities, and to create partnerships, as you say, that go beyond short-term consulting and into long-term collaboration. So that's been fantastic, and thank you so much. And now we're in for another treat. So this now is going to be a presentation on healthcare opportunities, and presenting will be Aaron Dutta, who's the Senior Health Specialist at the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the Adb. Please go ahead, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and good morning and good afternoon. It's my pleasure to present on behalf of the Health Sector Group, which is, of course, across our regional departments and the SDCC department that's mentioned here. So as quick intro to what I'll be presenting, I have about 4 slides of laying some background, and then we'll dive into our pipeline. I'll actually talk about the pipeline a little bit more and focus on our technical assistance. Just an introductory comment, you might want to take a look at my colleague Eduardo Banzon's presentation from almost a year ago, where he lays out the history of ADB's investments and loans, grants in the health sector, sort of the long arc that we have traveled up to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that was actually a good segue into talking about where we were in the long ago times before COVID-19, hard to remember. But I think what as a region we were contending with is that there's high level of diversity in our developing member economies. I think what you'll notice here is in our region, the Asia Pacific region, which has about 40 countries with Adb operations, our upper middle income countries were doing quite well across the region, reaching global averages in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, Universal Health Coverage Indicators, which is a complex, comprehensive index. But our lower middle income and low income countries were not doing so well. And I think what is really quite shocking is the high level of out-of-pocket expenditure. The other trend we were tracking before COVID-19 hit us is, of course, the rising non-communicable disease burden. And here, DALYs is a technical term for disability adjusted life years, a way of measuring disease burden. It was rising sharply, but the transition from the old focus on communicable maternal nutritional health issues to non-communicable can be seen here. And you can see that it's not just the richer countries, it's actually the lower income countries where this was changing. And I think this is important because it was definitely before COVID-19 impacting how Adb sees our region, our contribution, where they might be lending and where they might be technical assistance and grant support. And a lot of our developing member economies were definitely before COVID-19 developing primary healthcare responses and also strengthening their hospital sectors. Next slide, please. One of the ways that they were developing their health sectors was, of course, through public-private partnerships. Again, about a year ago, my colleague was presenting on public-private partnerships across the ADB. And I think in his slide deck, there were examples from the People's Republic of China and in Indonesia, where ADB has done significant work trying to strengthen the private sector in health. And this is important because private sector, of course, in our region delivers a majority, if not a significant proportion of primary healthcare, but also of secondary and tertiary healthcare. Yet the regulation is weak, and ADB, as always, is looking to provide technical assistance into public-private partnership, but also into governance and capacity development in this area. We have been tracking, and through a modality which some of you may be familiar with, of policy-based lending, which really provides flexible budget support using a modality of sub-programs or other structures to allow the government to access ADB lending and support major reforms. And what major reforms are we interested in? I think here are a few examples. In India, we have pretty significant overall overhauling of the primary healthcare and the secondary healthcare sector through major schemes. One of them is the Prime Minister's health insurance scheme, PMJ, And we currently are processing a technical assistance for this to improve the digital health structure, the National Digital Health Mission in India. And I think that will be released soon. In the Philippines, similarly, we have a large health sector reform agenda under the Universal Health Coverage Act. And here we are again processing a large technical assistance program, and then also a policy-based lending, or PBL, that will go into, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to the pipeline. Next slide, please. So of course, I can't move ahead without talking a little bit about COVID-19. And here, what I think is important to note is that the region has very diverse progress against the main indicator of COVID-19 vaccination. And I'll leave the slide, of course, for you to look at later. You can see that many of our member economies have very disappointing, perhaps, coverage according to what they themselves would like, and others have done quite well. Amid the reasons, of course, are supply-demand imbalances. It's still hard to procure the vaccines which are eligible for ADB financing, but delivery readiness was initially slow to improve. We are getting much better at that through ADB technical assistance, including grants from some of our trust funds, which ADB manages. We expect the supply conditions for COVID-19 vaccines will ease, and ADB is commissioning some technical analysis around this, actually using European expertise. And we expect that once supply conditions ease in 2022, coverage targets that countries have set will increasingly start to get covered, with the residual demand after 2022 focusing on potential booster vaccinations and pediatric dosing. Of course, what COVID-19 has implied is that there will be increased investment into health system strengthening, especially areas that were found wanting. And I think here are a few examples: preparedness and resilience, including surveillance, hospital investments, such as in medical oxygen. We'll be doing a training very soon on that. Regional public health goods, which require more coordination, convening, and regional governance relative to investment. And ASEAN is actually leading on some of these areas, and ADB is supporting. But one of the areas where we, of course, see a need for expertise, and British expertise would be relevant, is in improving the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines in our region. We have quite a few different initiatives in this space, including through our non-sovereign private sector operations department, but also technical assistance. And I can say that right now we would be interested, of course, in any expressions of interest around mRNA manufacturing, especially looking at its potential long-term. We would like to do some work on that immediately. But more generally, I think this could be a topic of a whole webinar. We are seeing interest from countries in our region to set up with a long-term view, not just the immediate COVID-19 vaccine needs, manufacturing capacity and all the work that goes into that, not just for the actual vaccine, but also the ecosystem of inputs, technical capacity, personnel training, etc. Next slide, please. This is my final background slide. I'll go through this very quickly. I think what we're looking out into the future, and ADB is in the process of developing its health sector strategic framework for the next decade, is the impact of COVID-19. What are those major trends that we will track? One is, of course, we want to revive growth, the progress that the region was making towards universal health coverage indicators and meeting the SDG, third SDG. We want to rebuild back better, looking at public health, looking at curative services, and of course, all of the elements of surveillance, and meeting not just this pandemic, but the next pandemic's needs. And we want to, of course, look at any lessons and successful innovations. I think Shanti mentioned digitalization. This is a huge trend for us, and I think COVID-19 has accelerated it for our region. And I'll talk a little bit later about some technical assistance in this space. Of course, health sector renewal and looking at the NCD burden is going to be important. And we're tracking the risk that fiscal conditions may be negative against the health sector or social sectors overall after this surge in spending that we've seen in the last 18 months. There'll be perhaps a reset as we consolidate on the fiscal side. Again, an issue to watch. Next slide, please. So here we are looking at ADB's pipeline now in earnest. I think if you look at the big picture for this year, which is dominated by APVAX, which is our Asia Pacific Vaccines Access Facility, $9 billion. I'll talk a little bit more about that. 79% of actually the sovereign pipeline, which is public sector focused, is dominated or is COVID-19 related. In terms of our regions, the two big regions, as always, and this has been traditional, our Southeast region, our Southeast Regional Department, and then the South Asia Regional Department. Just to note that Pakistan is actually a part of the Central and West Regional Department. So that is 12%, the next biggest. And then our smallest, of course, is the Pacific region and East Asia, which has fewer countries. By subsector, these terminologies are how ADB classifies them, and I think certainly we can explicate them more. But you'd probably notice the preponderance of communicable disease control at around 47%, with more general policy support and system development, health sector strengthening, basically comprising the next biggest half section. Next slide, please. So as promised, here is a quick look at our Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility. It is originally it meant to be about $9 billion, of which around $5 billion is likely to be approved, though of course some of these projects are yet to be presented to the board, so they are tentative. But in terms of what is already approved, $2.7 billion. Now, just in terms of procurement and interest for British industry, it's important to note that these are procurement-heavy projects, meaning that 90% or more of the value approved is actually meant for procurement of vaccines, including the cost of delivery and logistics. There is, of course, some component in these projects that is meant to strengthen systems. That is actually the project investment component. The small footnote there would be relevant for you to look at. But that is usually not a very large part of what has been approved. Regardless, I think there is a large amount of money flowing, and those firms with expertise in vaccine delivery, vaccine logistics, and information systems may find this of interest. Next slide. Now we get into some of the non-COVID-19 health pipeline. And again, as Alexandra mentioned, these slides will be available. And like Shanti's slides, please take a look at them later. I'll go through them fairly quickly so I can devote more time to our technical assistance pipeline. In Central and West Asia Department, where we have a lot of the countries in Central Asia, the titular stans, but also Pakistan and Georgia, Caucasus countries, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. We expect two large projects, which are multi-sectoral projects where health is a component. Some of these are budget support type projects, which present perhaps different types of opportunities, if any, for smaller firms. But the social protection project in Pakistan, which is going to potentially be used to support the SAS program, has a capacity development and training component as well. So I think firms with exposure to Pakistan may be interested. East Asia has traditionally been an area where we have done a lot more of our integrated work. Shanti mentioned our OP1, our Operational Priority 1 area. Here we have a lot of projects where health has worked closely with our social development colleagues in developing integrated projects in elderly care and in later term life projects. So here we have one for $150 million. And then Mongolia, we have a health systems strengthening program following on a long series of projects in that country looking at health systems and health financing. Next slide, please. Southeast Asia, usually one of our larger departments, has about $820 million programmed in the pipeline for this year, spread across our Mekong region, but also in Indonesia and Philippines. As you can see, some very large projects in Indonesia and Philippines. And to describe the Philippines project, Build Universal Healthcare, or Build UHC, this is really one of those PBL projects, the policy-based lending projects, which have two sub-programs. Here, the first sub-program is listed. It does have a technical assistance project separately, funded through our Japan Fund for Poverty Reduction, which is supporting this work, but most of this funding is directly budget support, policy-based lending. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Aaron, just to jump in, we've got about a couple of minutes, if you don't mind wrapping up this one.
Sure. Let me move ahead, and I will leave these for you to review in detail later. Let me go ahead to the technical assistance portfolio. Perhaps another slide. Another slide, please. Thank you. So if I may get 2 minutes, because I think this will be of relevance to our audience. These list the technical assistance programs currently active. Of course, one of them, the first, is ending soon, so may not offer much opportunity. But I want to highlight the third row here, our technical assistance number 9950, which has an active solicitation right now looking for expressions of interest, and that expression of interest is closing on the 11th of September, valued at around 3.25 million out of this currently approved 77 million. That solicitation is looking at vaccine-related knowledge, attitude, practices, surveying, vaccination-related information systems, and then finally vaccination-related logistics systems. And I would recommend those who have an interest to look at our procurement system, our procurement website, and express your interest if you have relevant capabilities. Also want to highlight the last here, which will be going into high gear by the end of this year. This is again on the agenda of digitalization. We have a large amount of work across the organization, but also in health and social sectors, looking at supporting our member economies with digitalization. And we are focusing here on health financing. And we expect about 3 different firm level procurements, consulting firm procurements. Most of the value of this TA is currently uncommitted. Next slide, please. And I would like to summarize this last, sorry, we can move ahead. This is just a pie. So I would focus on the bigger projects of technical assistance across our regional departments. Some are regional in the sense that there are no specific DMCs of focus or developing member countries of focus, but others have specific country focus here. India has obviously quite a few large technical assistance programs, as you can see, diverse across strengthening universal health coverage schemes, but also some COVID-19 related support. That TRTA for COVID-19 response is mostly already committed, but there's still some more resources there. Indonesia has some very large programs coming up, and specifically Philippines, the support towards that Build UHC policy-based lending project that I mentioned is listed here, and Philippines-based capacity in the Philippines would be interested in that. So again, the last slide here after this, next is our list of contacts. Again, of course, your primary contact will be the email address listed on the solicitation. Please use that first. For if you have any major technical issues or would like to express your interest, you can certainly reach out to me. My email address is here, but also to my colleagues who are more focused on specific regional departments. So thank you, and apologies if I exceeded my time. Hopefully you found it useful, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Aaron. Thank you so much for that. And apologies that we ran over by a couple of minutes, but I thought that was so useful. And for me, really, the big headline here is rebuilding back better and with a very long-term view. And as Aaron mentioned, we will be sharing those slides so you can see all of the pipeline in detail. And now we're going to continue on with our next presentation, which is on the specific procurement system and actually how to access that. And that's going to be presented by Julian Dossey, who is the procurement specialist at Adb. And Julian has been with Adb for over 10 years and has experience in has a career spanning procurement, anti-corruption, water management, and climate change. And prior to Adb, he worked in the UK with a development consulting firm and a research think tank. Julian, with that, over to you, please. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you again this year for the UK Business Opportunities Virtual Seminar, which I also attended last year, and always a pleasure to do business with British expertise and the other partners involved. I lived in the UK for 4 years prior to Adb and attended some British expertise events myself, so it's always a pleasure to be back in touch. So I'm going to spend a few minutes today taking you through essentially the how of doing business with Adb. You heard about from our colleagues Shanti and Aaron about the specific opportunities coming up in the education and health sectors, which hopefully are of interest to you. And how do you access those opportunities specifically is always the question. Aaron gave you some insight to a certain extent in terms of some of the upcoming pipeline and some of the tenders that he's looking at right now. But what specifically do you need? How do you go about it? And some broader overview of Adb's operations I'll be taking you through now. So I've structured my presentation into 4 sections and take you through them one by one. General overview of Adb operations, which will go through quite quickly as it was discussed to a certain extent by our introductory speakers. Then I'll take you through the business opportunity and procurement frameworks in which Adb operates and give you some tips for success and ways to access opportunities on the website to conclude. And then we'll have Q&A. So next slide, please. So we'll start off with Adb operations. Hopefully this is clear to you, especially if you've been working with Adb for many years, but in case this is your first event, we do have 68 member countries. We're about 55 years old. We work with all manner of partners, private, public, NGO, foundation, academic, and the like. And we deliver a combination of loans, grants, technical assistance, and also private sector equity and guarantees. And we do that both with our own money and also with money that we manage, for example, from other development partners who we co-finance projects with. In 2020, our largest borrowers, and this is pretty consistent over the years, it's some trend changes here and there, but generally speaking, we're talking about India, PRC, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Indonesia. Philippines often runs a close 6th. So the larger economies in the region are by nature the larger borrowers. Next slide, please. As our earlier speakers alluded to, we have a corporate strategy. We previously had a corporate strategy called Strategy 2020. Now we have a corporate strategy called Strategy 2030, under which there are 7 operational priorities and 3 so-called key approaches. You can see them there. And this is how the things we're targeting to work toward as an institution. Pre-COVID anyways. Of course, COVID has put itself firmly into this strategy and we've been financing COVID response as well. But outside of COVID, these are the priorities that Adb is working toward. Next slide, please. So we do have a major active portfolio, and it's growing year by year, as you can see, a nice linear trend line there. 116 billion ongoing of loans, grants, technical assistance, equity, and guarantees. What we call our sovereign and our non-sovereign portfolio. Sovereign being the projects we do in collaboration with governments, with public sector entities in our developing member countries, and non-sovereign being the projects we do with well, private sector entities or the like in our developing member countries. So giving a loan, for example, to a business or a subsidiary bank in one of our member countries. You can see quite an uptick in 2020 in the portfolio in particular, 14.7 billion net change. A lot of that coming from COVID response, obviously. In particular, that was mostly in the sovereign portfolio last year because of all of the COVID response lending that we were providing to our government partners. And you can see the breakdowns there in terms of how that's comprised by loan, grant, equity, technical assistance, TA, and also, you know, how it's changing year by year in terms of commitment, cancellation, closure, and the like. Next slide, please. Now, every seminar, every year, we always show this kind of graph, the share of our portfolio by sector. And it's interesting because actually it changed quite a bit this year. I was looking at my slide deck from last year and I updated the figures. And you can see there the public sector management in particular has jumped up quite significantly last year. In particular, a lot of that's going into COVID response or policy-based lending in relation to COVID response. But still over the years, the two biggest sectors in ADB remain transport and energy. You know, bridges, airports, roads, power plants, solar, hydro, the like. But those percentages are shrinking bit by bit as some of our softer sectors grow. And I think that's the opportunities of interest to people on this call, in particular in health and education. Still modest figures, 5% and 3%, but those are growing year on year. And again, this is of a $116 billion portfolio. So that still equates to quite a few $1 billion at play here and of interest to you. Likewise, you know, the others, agriculture, water, and urban, they tend to sort of dance around each other a bit. Finance as well has grown a fair bit over the years. So we're seeing the growth of the social sectors in particular. And if you come to one of these in 5 years' time, the graph may look quite different as well. As ADB again pivots itself, both the COVID recovery and also in relation to achieving its strategy 2030 operational priorities. Next slide, please. So just a regional breakdown of the same figures. As alluded to, our Southeast, South, and Central West portfolios are our largest ones. Southeast covering everything as far east as Timor-Leste and as far west as Myanmar. South covering from east and Bhutan west to India and Nepal and Maldives and the like. Central West, the various former Soviet republics, as well as the Caucasus region, Afghanistan and Pakistan. East Asia, China, PRC, and Mongolia, and the Pacific, everything else, essentially all of our Pacific member island countries, Fiji, Solomons, Cooks, Palau, Samoa, etc., PNG. So, you know, a fairly small proportion in the Pacific, but a lot of interesting opportunities there nonetheless. I cover the procurement, particularly in the Pacific region, so I can attest to you that don't just be looking at the numbers here, because there are still a lot of opportunities in the Pacific and elsewhere, and we're always keen to get new faces and experience into that region in particular. Next slide, please. This is just something we pulled from a recent report summarizing ADB's COVID response to date in 2020. So you can go through the numbers in detail. I appreciate it's a bit hard to see on the screen, but essentially 20 billion at play through our various support facilities, including 152 million of grants. And you can see how those commitments have fallen out in terms of recipient countries. So Philippines has benefited quite heavily, as Indonesia, Pakistan, Thailand, and the like. You can also see how it's fallen by sector there. So you can see health, of course, and the large amount in the public sector management, which also showed up, as I noted, on our previous slide in terms of the movement up in the sector ranking of public sector management as a result of all this COVID-based policy support. Next slide, please. So now I'll take you through just some of the overview of the business opportunities and basic business structure, way we work, key top bidders and the like. Next slide, please. So as the Deputy Trade Commissioner mentioned at the start, ADB is a good entry point into the Asia Pacific if your company is looking to expand to the region. We are able to provide assured financing. If an ADB project is approved and you are awarded a contract under it, unless you perform poorly, chances are you're going to be getting paid and you're going to be the project is going to be moving ahead. It's very rare that projects get canceled or taken off the books entirely once they're approved. And payments then move through the system on a regular basis. Obviously there's going to be a bit of a difference if you're contracted by the government, which ADB is providing a loan to, versus being contracted directly by ADB if you're working on an ADB administered grant or consulting assignment. But nonetheless, the money does move and you can be assured of payment for services rendered. You'll have seen my graph about the rapidly rising portfolio, and particularly the expansion for COVID response in 2020. And that means, more money means more opportunities, because the vast majority of those funds are going out through procurement, with the exception, obviously, of some policy-based lending, which is more budget support type work. All the rest essentially is being contracted through goods, works, services of various sorts. So that all translates into opportunities for providers of goods, works, and services like yourselves. Likewise, we have strong procurement procedures, strong anti-corruption procedures, as they noted earlier in the kickoff to this event, and these are very important. They guide our work very closely. As a procurement specialist myself, it's ADB pays me essentially to ensure that procurements are done well and fair and transparently, and that's what we do, and we ensure that to the best of our abilities. So you can also be assured that if you do feel as though you were treated unfairly, you have people in ADB that can help support resolving your complaint and seeing it through to a logical and reasonable conclusion. Next slide, please. So, again, if this is your first time attending an ADB event, just to give you a flavor of the types of opportunities, apart from those already discussed by Aaron and Shanti in terms of a specific education and health opportunities. Of course, your firms can supply us goods or works or turnkey services, construction or consulting or other types of services. So, everything under the sun, really, depending on the nature of the project, building a school, building a hospital, providing an MRI machine, for example, or carrying out field work to train students in curriculum development, or doctor, nurse training. Any of these things could be coming under an ADB financed project. So it really depends, of course, on what's approved for financing, but these are all possibilities. Next slide, please. As my director Rustam referred in his remarks, this is the sort of volume of the opportunities procurement related in 2020. I like this figure, it's quite illustrative. About 10 billion of procurement done in 2020 across about 7,000 contracts. Okay, so this is the nitty gritty of it now. About 3,700 consulting services contracts, 700 worth about 730 million. About 850 contracts for the supply of goods worth about 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion. 1,400 contracts for civil works or related works worth about 6.9 billion. And you can also see the numbers underneath specifically for COVID response. So that's a lot of contracts. That's a lot of opportunities to bid. It's a lot of opportunities to get involved with ADB and our government partners. So you should never feel at a loss for opportunities unless you're capable of bidding for 7,000 contracts a year. Next slide, please. Just wanted to tell you a bit about and can you just click through all of the arrows as well, organizer, until the last gray arrow, just like that. Yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, like that. So this is I just want to give you a sense of the typical ADB project cycle if you're not familiar, and where your company can come in and add value, okay, in the different stages of the process. For example, I saw a question earlier on about how monitoring, evaluation, and learning providers can get involved. Well, pay attention here for a minute, and I'll tell you. So we have the project cycle as at the start of it all. Really, ADB meets its government partners every few years. For example, ADB management will go and meet with the government of PRC and will say, okay, PRC, what do you want to do together for the next 5 years? What kind of priorities do you want us to focus on with you? What kind of specific initiatives do you have in mind for us to support? And we hash that out, and it's called a country partnership strategy. Okay, and that lays out essentially the way forward for ADB in that country or region. In the case of the Pacific, we have a regional strategy over the next, say, 4 to 6 years. Obviously, we might need, consultants or various experts to help us in those consultations, develop those types of strategy documents. Then we move into individual identification of projects and development of the projects coming out of that strategy and the business plan that underlies it. So in the development of a project concept, you're thinking sort of feasibility studies and the like that would generally be undertaken by consultants, either individual or consulting firms, to develop the project concept. The concept may be in a various stage of development. Some governments have project concepts on their books for decades before they bring it to ADB for financing, and the concept is already well developed. In other cases, it's very, there's nothing developed and it's starting from scratch. And then you would move into more detailed preparation. ADB would start working on the approval documents for our own board of directors to approve the financing. So there we would again be relying on consultants and other types of service providers such as trainers or survey outfits to develop the feasibility studies in more detail and develop the various due diligence requirements for project approval, such as environmental impact assessments or procurement plans or resettlement plans for the impending works or other related infrastructure of the project. Then that goes through the normal approval processes, both within the government and with ADB's board of directors. And then the implementation starts over the next 5 to 10 or even 15 years. And in that implementation, of course, that's where the majority of money is happening. That's where the majority of procurement is going out. And that is to undertake, detailed design, construction supervision, and the actual supply of goods and works that are envisaged in the project itself, whether that's building a hospital or building a school or anything, related to this or others. So, there we're engaging not just consultants anymore, but also the civil works contractors and suppliers of goods and related services as well. Finally, we, wrap up the project. We bring contracts to a close. We evaluate its success overall. We write what's called a project completion report, lessons learned, and all of these feedback into the country partnership strategy next time around. But in doing that evaluation, of course, we also engage in both, sort of what we can consider as partisan evaluation consultants, i.e. consultants that would be working for the regional department to evaluate the project, and then also independent evaluation consultants from our independent evaluation department that does its own independent reviews of the success of projects following the review of the department that managed the project itself. Okay, so I hope this helps you to sort of understand how you can get involved in a typical ADB project cycle. Next slide, please. I'll just take you quickly through for your own sort of knowledge and market understanding. Top members that supply goods in terms of overall procurement awards year on year, goods, works, and services. So over the last 4 years, you can see the top members in ADB supplying goods, India, PRC, Bangladesh, but also we had Sweden up there. I believe that's through ABB, that big goods company you may be aware of. Vietnam, Hong Kong also featured, America also featured. Next slide. Works, again, a similar story. You see quite a strong presence in PRC and India, Philippines, Bangladesh, for obvious reasons that both PRC and India have very advanced local construction markets. And a lot of the smaller works packages in particular can go out through what's considered national bidding and are primarily awarded to national contractors, who could subsequently subcontract onward. But it would really be the bigger, more complex, riskier packages in these more advanced member countries that might go for international advertisement more than national advertisement. Whereas there's more opportunity for international works and goods contractors from, say, Europe or North America to get involved in some of the smaller or lower income member countries of ADB, where more of the procurement, including lower value procurement, is going out through international advertising. Next slide. For consulting, no, it's a different story, as flagged at the start again by the Trade Commissioner. Here we see North America and Europe featuring more strongly, provision of knowledge services. UK was there, number 4 in 2018. It's dropped off again in 19 and 20. So I will encourage you all to put your bids in and push that number back up into the top 5, as we'd like to see UK up there. The other intellectual consulting competitors in that regard are, the US, Korea features quite, Republic of Korea features quite strongly, Australia, France, Germany, Indonesia as well, and India as well. Next slide. Now, just to give you quickly, again, some of the top suppliers for goods, works, and services, you could potentially consider reaching out, forming joint ventures, becoming one of their associate or subcontracting partners as a way to get your foot in the door. Okay, if you lack ADB experience or experience in the Asia Pacific region, but you have a network with some of these companies that are winning a lot of work with ADB, that's a good way to start. It's a good way to sort of get your foot in by being a subcontractor or an associate partner. And through those successful project experiences, you can eventually sort of forge your own path and become a prime contractor. So yeah, next slide. That was goods. This is works. Again, some familiar names, I'm sure, for most of you. Next slide, please. And this is services. So Smack Edges, Arup, and others up on there that you could consider reaching out to. Next slide, please. Now, this is pulled from the fact sheet, which is on the website of ADB and UK's relationship. And it, again, was covered by the Trade Commissioner, but just to briefly summarize, you can see UK's contribution to ADB's procurement over the years. And yeah, I mean, your largest consultant by amount awarded from 2016 to 2020 is Arup. You also have Landell Mills, Montmac, Oxfam, Routen as the other top 5, and then quite a substantial amount going to individual consultants as well at 45 million. But on your goods and work side, a little bit less. You can see quite a small number there, but that's something we'd like to change. If you are a supplier of goods or services in the education or health sector on this call, we're certainly happy to hear from you and hear from your experience and discuss ways that you could potentially get more involved in ADB financed projects and procurements. Okay, so let's try and get those numbers up. Next slide. If you'd like to play around more with our procurement statistics, we launched a new website last year. It's quite useful, actually. You can click through the URL there at your leisure later on and basically go through all the different procurement statistics by country, by type of sector, by nationality of contractor, et cetera, and find out more than what's just on my slides here, if that's of interest, and to help develop your market intelligence. Next slide, please. So now I'll just give you a couple slides on the rules of the game, as it were. Next slide. So if you may or may not be aware, we actually have two different procurement frameworks in place right now at ADB. Because we have a new policy, well, not new anymore, but it was new, approved in 2017, that covers essentially projects approved after that date, with their concepts approved after that date. And then we still have an old procurement framework on the right side there for projects that were approved and still ongoing prior to that point. Okay, so you can, this would be shown to you in say the request for proposal documents or the tender documents that you would download. It should tell you which procurement framework this particular procurement you're looking at is governed under, because there are still procurements going out under the old framework. Because again, an approved project could easily run for 10 or 15 years. So, there will be procurements still going out under the old framework for several more years to come. There are some key differences in the bidding documents that are important to be aware of. Some new flexibilities and new measures that we developed for the new framework, for example, aren't in the old one. So as a bidder, you want to know which framework you're bidding within, as that will obviously have different sets of rules that influence your bid and your resulting award or negotiations accordingly. Next slide, please. We have 6 principles governing our procurement. 2 of them are under the new framework, the ones in yellow. Nothing particularly groundbreaking here. I mean, our procurement should be fair, it should be efficient, transparent, and it should deliver value for money. So, this is common across public sector organizations. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to a project cycle, we also have what we call our procurement cycle. And again, I'll just spend a minute taking you through that to help you understand how it fits across the project cycle. So if you recall the country partnership strategy stage of the project cycle, from a procurement perspective, what we're doing as procurement people at that stage is essentially undertaking a risk assessment of the country or sector's procurement environment. And what that risk assessment enables us to do is determine the extent to which ADB needs to be involved in reviewing procurement documentation being prepared by the various borrowers or implementing agencies of our government clients. Okay, and of course, there's consultants involved to develop these risk assessments for us. Then during project conceptualization, what we're doing as procurement side of things is considering the risk of that project in particular from a procurement perspective, and developing what's called a procurement plan, which is essentially the document that lists all of the envisaged contracts that would be procured under that project. So for example, a procurement plan for an education project may include, one construction supervision consultant, 2 works contracts to build school number 1 and school number 2, an audit contract for a service auditor, maybe a supply of goods contract, a supply textbooks. I'm just thinking, out of the blue here. But as an example, all of these contracts would be listed in what's called the procurement plan. Each one would say, for example, Q4 2022 is the expected advertisement date for, supply of textbooks. And it would also give the procurement method, whether it's open bidding or direct selection or limited bidding, it would be stated there. And any other considerations for that package are listed in the plan. So the procurement plan, from a business development perspective, if you're a firm looking at trying to identify opportunities with ADB, the procurement plan is your best friend, essentially. because that is where the nitty-gritty of each contract are. When procurement plans go onto our website, it would behoove you to read through them in detail, especially if they're related to the sector in which you're interested, because that is, you know, where you will get the detail for you to really start detailed business planning. Okay, and even be able to time the, you know, the formation of your bid teams, etc., in line with the anticipated advertisement dates and getting your partners lined up and everything else that involves in a bid process. Then we move through, obviously, the bidding process, which is, you know, then locked in, essentially a formal process that follows bidding documents that we will have developed as ADB or the government with ADB's review. Bid evaluation, where the decision is made on the basis of an evaluation report. Contract award, and then of course implementation, contract management, and then you know, project contract closure and feedback and evaluation in the same way as the project cycle. So that's just gives you a flavor of how the procurement process itself and how you can essentially bid for ADB opportunities fits into the broader project cycle of ADB. Next slide, please. So I think I've mentioned most of this, but it's just there for your reference, essentially, that, you know, our government partners, our public sector partners, the executing agencies, or the borrowers as we call them, are, you know, procuring most of that 10 billion of procurement that you saw on my earlier slide. You know, ADB, we signed some contracts for consulting in particular ourselves, and in that case, you work and are basically contracted by ADB, but the vast majority of goods and works in particular is being contracted. You're signing a contract, say, with the Ministry of Education in Nepal, or you're signing a contract with the Ministry of Health in the Philippines. You know, you're not signing a contract with ADB. But ADB is in the contract. It's mentioned that, you know, the contract is financed by ADB. It depends on ADB financing, and of course, it's governed by ADB policies. So if you are treated unfairly, of course, you can always resort to those ADB policies. But of course, also once in a contract, you are also bound by the normal dispute resolution clauses of a contract. So your first port of call would be to resolve your issues with the respective borrower or executing agency that you're working with. Next slide, please. And yeah, I mean, we've mentioned it, but it's there again for your reference, our anti-corruption policy and integrity principles, which guide all of our work. Again, we have quite a strong investigations team. If there is a suspicion of corruption or collusion, fraud, obstruction, anything like that, abuse of assets in an ADB financed or supported activity, we will be investigating it. And if we do find credible evidence, then, you know, you can expect to be, if it's your firm that's up to no good, passing brown envelopes or something, then you can expect to be receiving a sanction from ADB if found guilty, as we can call it, not necessarily guilty, but I mean, whatever you can call it, if you're found beyond not reasonable doubt, but whatever. Anyways, the point is that if there is evidence that you are undertaking corruption in an ADB financed activity, then there will be penalties for that. And we also have joint debarment agreements with the other MDBs. So for example, if you get sanctioned by ADB, there's a good chance you would also be sanctioned by World Bank, EBRD, African Development Bank as well. So don't do it, because you could lose a significant portion of your business line if that is a business line of yours. Next slide, please. So just concluding now with some tips for success before we open up into questions. Next slide, please. None of these are particularly earth-shattering. Hopefully you're aware of most of them, but of course they always bear repeating. You know, what we liked about our in-person business opportunities fair held every year was that it brought 1,000 people together into one room and really allowed them to exchange business cards, network, bounce ideas off each other. And that's a very, and most importantly as well, meet virtual meetings with various ADB project officers. Obviously these networks are important because of the informal knowledge you gain from it, not necessarily that you will gain a formal procurement advantage. But of course, it always helps to know people. It always helps to know what's going on, both in terms of how then you write your bid, because you have better knowledge of what's going on and then can tailor your bid language accordingly. And because inevitably good performance lends itself to more contracts. If word gets around that your firm is doing well on project X, then another project Y might be interested in taking a more serious look at you through the procurement process as well. So obviously COVID has made it more difficult to network, but it's not impossible. LinkedIn is your friend. Many hundreds of ADB staff are on LinkedIn, and you can find them by searching out ADB and looking in the list of employees, and you can identify education or health people and send them a message and see if they reply to you, or otherwise at least follow them and keep track of what they're posting on LinkedIn. They often post their latest consulting opportunities or other knowledge products that they might be developing. And to the extent that you can attend other ADB events, virtual or in person otherwise, those are also good opportunities to meet and network with relevant ADB staff working in the sector, whether that's, for example, attending an education event or a health event or elsewhere. If you don't try, you won't succeed. So it never hurts to express interest if you think you at least have a shot. Obviously, if you're a firm working on water treatment plants, then you shouldn't be bidding for building schools if you have no experience in that area. But if it's within your area, and you might not have experience in that country or in that particular mode of, say, curriculum development or something, but give it a shot, right? What's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is you're not selected. From a procurement specialist perspective myself, where I see many dozens of advertisements go out every month, some get a lot of interest and some don't. And if you happen to be, even if you're quite inexperienced, but if you happen to get in on one of those ones that doesn't get much interest, then suddenly you might be front of the line for an opportunity, even if you're sort of relatively new to the game. So it's a numbers game as well as it is a quality game. You need sort of both sides of it. You can't expect, even if you're the best firm in the world, you can't expect to win everything you bid on. But you should also bid, and expect at least a reasonable success rate from doing so. Yeah, I think some of the other ones I already spoke about. Reach out and try and form partnerships with firms that are known to be good and high volume ADB suppliers, because they know what they're doing. They have generally, and well, not every firm that was on my slides earlier necessarily has the best track record among ADB staff. They may win a lot of work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every ADB staff member thinks highly of them. So of course you have to be a bit careful, but generally speaking, if they're up there, then at least they know what they're doing and can give you advice or can bring you in a team, and that will probably improve your chances of success quite significantly if you're new to this and looking for ways to get yourself either into the region, into a particular country, or into ADB business more specifically. And next slide, please. Obviously, what not to do. Like I said earlier, no corruption or foul play, please. We take that very seriously. No conflicts of interest. If your firm was preparing the feasibility study, then you might have an issue bidding for the detailed design, for example, unless that's clearly allowed in the procurement process, which it occasionally is, but not always. We still have the rule in place that your firm has to be registered from an ADB member, which of course the UK is. but don't be making a JV with, in most cases, okay, especially consulting, don't be making a JV with a firm from Africa or from South America, because those continents, they have no countries that are members of ADB. Now, if the project is eligible for universal procurement, which some co-financed projects are, then it's okay. You have to look, though, at the project documents, because it will say clearly in the approval documents whether or not a project is open to all nationalities or not, and it will also state it in the bidding documents as well. Don't give us conditional bids, by and large, saying we'll do this for you, but we have to change this, and this. That's generally not accepted in sort of open bidding procedures, especially for goods and works. For consulting, you have the opportunity to comment on the terms of reference, but you're still expected to give us a proposal on the basis of what's in the terms of reference. And of course, dot your I's and cross your T's. We do still have to throw out good proposals sometimes because they are missing some important compliance requirement, and that's unfortunate, and we don't like doing it. Nobody likes having to do it, but that's why it's important that you have to sign your bid letter and give us the necessary documents that are specified in the bidding documents to avoid unfortunate circumstances like that occurring. Okay, next slide, please.
Julian, just to let you know, there is about 4 minutes left for the rest of your presentation, if that's okay. Thank you.
That's fine. I'm almost done. I think I've got 2 slides left, so I'll be fine. Thank you. So, yeah, if you do have a complaint, we do have both complaint forms for both procurement-related complaints and for fraud complaints or integrity complaints. They're different, so pick which type of complaint you have and submit accordingly. And another good tip is always request, if you're a consulting firm and you've been shortlisted, but you weren't successful, you can always request a debriefing from us, okay? And someone like me will sit you down for 30 minutes and we'll tell you what we liked and what we didn't like about your proposal. And these are very useful learning opportunities for you, especially if you're newer to this process, because we'll tell you straight up, this expert wasn't very good, or, this part of your method was pretty weak. And you can learn from that and, improve on it in the future. So I think that's always something useful we don't really get many debriefing requests, as many as we should, to be honest. From the average tender, say with 6 firms in an RFP, I might get 1 debriefing request, but there were 5 unsuccessful firms. So those other 4 firms are passing up their opportunity to learn about what they were good at and what they weren't good at, and that's unfortunate. So please always do ask us for debriefing if you are shortlisted but not successful. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the website, if this was a longer sort of whole day event, I would give you another hour on how to navigate our website. But because of the time constraints, I just have to show you a screen grab. Basically, if you go to adb.org, you go to the Work With Us tab, you will find there a number of good resources to get you started or update you if you're already an old hand. Okay, some frequently asked questions, and most importantly, really, is that projects and tenders page, which you can see on the right side near the bottom, because on that page is essentially where all of the project documentation goes up for all of ADB's projects, all of the invitations to bid, all of the procurement plans. That's basically the most, in my humble opinion, the most important page on the ADB website, projects and tenders page, and is also one of the most heavily trafficked for good reason. So spend some time on that page, click through, do some searching, look at different projects, look at different procurement plans, and that will really help in your business development and in helping you to prioritize what you should go for next. Next slide, please. If you're a consultant, you want to do consulting directly with ADB, you also need to register in our consultant management system, CMS, which is fairly straightforward. It takes a few minutes. You just have to go there and sign up, and then you can also start receiving weekly notifications of all the new consulting opportunities available to you. Okay. Next slide. Yeah, so I think I spoke about most of this already, but just to conclude essentially with the different types of documents you'll see on the ADB website. You'll see the country partnership strategies I mentioned. You'll be able to see the procurement plans I mentioned. Something else to bear in mind is the potential for hop-on opportunities. Okay, so when a consulting firm is awarded a contract, it often arises during implementation that they need to get another subcontractor, or a contract variation is processed to increase the scope of their work, and they need some more experts or something like this. And they need to get a survey firm, or maybe an audit firm, or a monitoring and evaluation firm on board. That will often go out. You would be engaged through that work and sign a contract with the prime contractor, but that would be receiving ADB money, essentially, or ADB financed money. So that's another basically way of getting ADB experience on your CV, is to identify these kinds of opportunities with the prime consultants or contractors, which are announced on our website. Okay, we disclose lists of both the shortlisted firms and also the contracts awarded, so you can give those firms a call and say, hey, I see you won this contract for $20 million in Cambodia. We'd love to help you out if you need us some point during implementation, right? And you can kind of talk about that with them and see if there's a way to get yourself into it. Next slide, please. I think that's it. Here's there one more. This is the last one. This is just if you're, again, specifically interested in COVID, click this URL, and this is our dedicated COVID business outreach page, where you can, there's some specific opportunities posted there, live opportunities which you can bid upon, say for PPE or for supply chain advisors or whatever is needed these days in this phase of the response, and learn more about how ADB is supporting the COVID response on this page. Okay, I think that's my last slide. One more, organizer. Yeah. Okay. So to conclude, hope you found that useful. Keep the conversation going, keep the networking going. These are 3 good links to follow on LinkedIn. Okay, join our Consultants Network group. There's about nearly 9,000 members on that group. We frequently post new opportunities there and networking connection requests and the like. I'm one of the moderators, so you'll see me on there frequently. Same with the Suppliers Network. Both good resources for you to expand your network and to try and see new opportunities with us. And also follow us on our ADB Business Center showcase page, where my team is regularly posting about these virtual business opportunity seminars we're doing, so you could join some other ones, and other related events and resources are going up there as well. Okay. So if there's anything else, I'm happy to entertain questions, or if not, happy to be in touch with you bilaterally going forward in the future for any of your procurement related concerns. Thanks very much.
Julian, thank you so much. That was brilliant and such useful tips. And I have to agree, read the procurement plan, everyone. Absolutely, this is where you will get the meat of the information, and that's when you can line up your resources and potential partners and bid. You will succeed eventually, and you might get very, very lucky, as Julian said as well. So we're going to go to Q&A now, and thank you so much to all of our panel who've already been dealing with some of the questions in chat as we've been going along. There is a question that has been answered very briefly in chat by Rustam, but I wonder if Rustam wouldn't mind coming on and just answering that in person. So the question, well, actually, it's a combination of a couple of different questions, and thank you to the audience also for those questions. What is ADB's current approach on international development projects in Afghanistan and in Myanmar? Would you be able to share anything at all with regards to existing projects or the pipeline? And Rustam, would you mind coming on and answering that for us, just for the audience who may have not read your response, please?
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. I think our current approach, because of this latest developments in Afghanistan and to some extent also in Myanmar, is that we have to suspend operations. We have certain internal processes which we have to follow, and that would involve the analysis of the situation on the ground. And since this change represents some risks, we have to, first of all, analyze, and then we already informed all consultants who are working in Afghanistan to suspend their services, right? Because we do not want to create additional kind of situation where there are additional burden. I cannot tell you right now how long it will take to complete this analysis. It's a joint effort by all or large development partners who are working in those countries, and we have to come to a certain agreement on what to do next. So for the time being, I would say the operations are suspended until further notice, and we are not going to process any new projects. With the ongoing loan projects and TA projects, basically we suspend, with maybe some exception of activities which do not require consultants to be in the field. But these are very few, and we have to assess on a case-by-case basis whether we will continue, because even those kind of activities are put on hold right now. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Rustam. And of course, whenever we know, I'm sure we will be letting everybody know as well. And I'm sure that, if you sign up to ADB updates, you will find out again as soon as the reviews are completed. And I know everybody's working very hard to complete those really as soon as it is possible. Thank you very much for that. There is another question that I think Stefan Bissadi, who is also on the line today, wanted to answer live. Stefan, the question was, and I should mention that Stefan is a senior procurement specialist at ADB. He wasn't part of our panel, but we're very happy to also have him joining us today. The question is from Mint Rose, and the question was, I'm surprised that the UK is not consistently in the top 5 providers of services, given that we are a service knowledge economy with world-renowned expertise in education and health, etc. So do we know the reasons behind this? And Stefan, would you like to come on and answer that live for us?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for the question. As explained by Julian and Rustam, you may have, depending the years, different sector focus. And so it means that you may have variation in the consultant and the contractors repartition by country, depending on sometimes the part taken by different countries in this opportunity, and the special added value or the special competencies of some countries in these sectors. But as it was explained, there is an international competition on that of firms, and all the opportunities are really following competitive and fair allocation. So there should not be any more interpretation on these numbers and variation, I think, than specific project and maybe sectors or variation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that. And Rustam, did you want to come in and add something as well?
Yeah, I think it's quite important to share this information. One factor is, of course, increased competition, because we are measuring the total value of contracts, right? Aggregate value of contracts from firms from a particular country. But in reality, we have to understand that many big international firms and say UK-based firms, they have branch offices somewhere overseas, like Mott MacDonald or Arup. They're based in the UK, but they have offices in many countries across our region. And when those firms are awarded contracts, they are not counted as a UK-based, because their legal place of incorporation could be somewhere else. So this is partly also a reason why maybe there is increased competition actually within the same group of companies, but representing different branches. And we see more and more contracts awarded to those branches because they're closer to the project sites, closer to the countries where we work, and they possess actually regional experience. So this is another very important point to remember. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Great answers, both of you. Thank you. My next question is to our 2 sector leads today, so Arin and Shanti. And the question is, many ADB countries are members and recipients of multiple multilateral development banks, In places like Central Asia, for example, we see related projects implemented by the World Bank, the EBRD, and the ADB, to name just a few. Is there any other guidance that bidders can use to understand the broader intentions and priorities of these institutions? And Shanti, I wonder if you'd like to start us off, and then maybe Aaron would like to continue.
Okay, I'm sorry, my audio was a little unclear. You were asking about how different international partners work together at the country level?
Precisely, and where a company can get guidance on that.
Right, that's true. In many countries, we work together. Sometimes, in kind of in a coordination and a kind of harmonization mode. But in some cases, in active kind of partnership with each other. Like for instance, we've had programs in Bangladesh, Nepal, where ADB, World Bank, and a few other agencies work together in a common pool funding approach and have common monitoring and evaluation agreements. We have common monitoring and supervision agreements. We have agreement on the overarching program priorities, objectives, and all of that. So in those cases, it's relatively simple because all of this information is available in one composite package, either with the government or with any of the partners, and in fact, in some cases, it may be like some recruitment is being done by one agency, but it's on behalf of the group since they work together. That's one kind of modality. In other cases, the coordination may be a little more loose, where it's more about informing each other of what's going on. There, I think what we try to do, where we have substantive investments in kind of allied fields, we request the government to have a donor coordination mechanism and regular donor consultation groups or working groups and things like that. So where things get discussed and programs get implemented in a harmonious way. And again, the point of information would be mostly from the government counterpart or the government focal point. And in some cases, the donors themselves have some kind of a working group arrangement where they talk through some of the critical issues and also talk about who will do what and how can they harmonize and cohere some of the activities from different agencies, whether it's studies or whether it's assessments, how to share the work or how to kind of make sure that we don't overlap or duplicate. So in that case, there may be a donor coordinating agency that might have the information. So it's country specific and it could be any of these formats.
Brilliant, thank you. Aaron, would you like to add something to this?
I think Shanti's covered the actual facts on the ground. On the health side, I'll just say that this last 18-month period has been very specific when it comes to development partner coordination. We've had to adapt a few of those modalities that Shanti mentioned just because of the emergency nature of technical assistance and procurement and the coordination. So I think for bidders and procurement interested individuals out there, I think what's important to note is that we are coordinating to avoid duplication, especially since requests are flying around or were flying around, I would say, about a year ago, related to pandemic-related materials procurement and technical assistance. There has to be more than just the usual level of coordination. And so we've avoided bidding bidding out and receiving requests for similar work. I think the World Bank has definitely coordinated with us, but also some of the major philanthropy organizations. The Gates Foundation has been talking with us, and we've talked with JICA as well to avoid emergency procurements in the same space. So I guess people should be assured that we do coordinate to the best possible way in this situation. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Would anybody else like to add anything? Rustam, anything from you on that?
Yeah, I can maybe add on coordination with other development partners on procurement aspects. Not only it's related, of course, mostly to COVID initiatives now, because we are all financing projects which will procure or finance vaccine procurement. Our coordination has actually intensified during last 1 year because we have to make sure that the criteria for vaccine eligibility are similar. And then also contract terms and conditions are similar, because we do not want to have a situation where the same manufacturer has different terms and conditions for supplying the same vaccine to the same country, but have different conditions because it's different financiers who provide support. So we spend a lot of time on that. And also with regard to vaccine administration, I think there was a joint effort with the World Bank and other development partners in order to better understand the vaccination programs in the countries, because this is the basis for individual financiers to decide the scope of projects which we are going to eventually finance. So this dialogue is still continuing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rustam. And I'm afraid we've run out of time for our Q&A today, but we do have just a few moments left for some closing remarks. So just to say from me, thank you very much to all of our speakers. If you click the chat function right now, you will see that a couple of very useful things have been posted in there. First of all, there are some Twitter handles that we would encourage you to follow, and that's ADB and the UK-ASEAN Business Council, also us at British Expertise, and also DIT. We do try and keep you updated on Twitter as much as we can. And then, of course, we do have the next event in the series coming up on the 15th of September. That's going to discuss transport and energy. So please do share this link with your colleagues in other sectors, because I imagine most of you today are probably from the healthcare and education sector, but there is a link right there, and there's some email addresses, and we will be sharing all of this information with you as well by email. Now, I would just like to hand over to each of our speakers for just 1 minute each of some closing remarks, and we're going to go in reverse order. So we're going to start with Julian, please. Julian, over to you for some closing words.
Sure, thanks. I think, I saw some good questions come through. So please do continue to reach out to us, and our contact details, I think, are in the slides, and join our groups on LinkedIn, because we understand that the procurement is sometimes a difficult thing to get a grasp of or to understand. You might be frustrated. Why did I lose this one? Or why am I not getting the traction that we hoped for? So we're always here to help, and that's a main part of our role, is helping good firms to do business with ADB and more effectively. So do reach out. We're always here, and I'm happy to help. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Julian. And Aaron, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I would just end with saying that we are not even sure what we will need, because the field is evolving in the health sector so quickly. I think we have given you a sense of where we're heading, some of the big projects that are coming out, but our technical assistance space is constantly evolving. And I think if you are interested in ADB work and you're interested in the health sector specifically, do take a look at some of the slides that we presented today in terms of the long-term trends we're tracking. And if you have interest and you have capability in our region, do reach out. We'd be interested in talking with all parties. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. And Shanti, please, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for joining in today. Going forward, we'd really like to see some transformational changes to how education is delivered for the benefit of our developing countries. As I mentioned, I think there's a great degree of openness in many of our member countries who are hungry for new solutions. And typically consulting opportunities are seen as one way, things that get put out by the contracting agency. But we would like to be on on a two-way communication in this regard. So if you have any exciting ideas and exciting work that you have implemented in some country with some other partner, especially those that have been adopted by governments with some impact on the ground, we would love to hear about them. We'd like to invite you to make a presentation, and we'd like to have a dialogue and conversation with you. So let's look at it as a two-way dialogue. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shanti. And last but not least, Rustam, for your closing remarks, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope today's seminar was useful, but of course we realize it's very difficult to provide the comprehensive information in such a short event. So this is continuous effort. We will continue providing information from our end to help participants, the companies to better understand ADB. But also I think from participants, and they have to also invest a little bit of resources and time to basically think strategically where they want to work, in what sector they want to work. And very important point, which maybe I have not shared, what we see is in the consulting services industry, the trend is it's not individual companies competing with each other. Even big companies, they're making associations when they submit bids to strengthen their chances to win. So therefore, I think it's quite important for those who want to win contracts to associate or explore what are the opportunities to associate with other firms so that the capacity and the experience is much kind of better, and that increases the chances to win. So this is the homework kind of stuff that we would encourage all participants to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rustam. What a fantastic note to end on, partnership, and the sum of the many becoming greater. So at that, thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening, everybody in Asia, and have a great day, everybody in the UK. And we very much look forward to our next event and to helping you all follow up. Thank you for joining, and goodbye.